think you have to take every failure as a learning opportunity, a way for you to examine what's happened, maybe not right away, while it's still very raw.
Welcome to Navigation and Discovery with Cameron Singh. We are back, finally back with a brand new episode after a good hiatus. We're going to be talking a lot about over the next couple months about what I've been up to, some updates, but we are back with a brand new episode with Dan Ramm, and we're going to be talking to him about his brand new book, Long Branch, Never Let the Truth Stand in the Way of a Good Story. So we're going to hear a little bit about Dan's awesome story and journey of life. He's been in Hollywood. He's been a director, producer. He's been a writer, won many Emmy awards, and we're going to talk to him about his journey of life. And you're going to enjoy learning about his different challenges, his journey, his perseverance in his endeavors, and how he was in construction and made a shift. So you're going to really enjoy hearing Dan's story. So I hope you enjoy this podcast interview with Dan Ramm. Well, Dan, welcome to the podcast. Happy to have you on.
Thank you. I'm happy to be here.
Yeah, I'm really excited to learn more about your book and also really learn more about your story and journey so far. I mean, you have Dan, you're an author, you're a writer and producer. So I'd
Yeah.
love to hear a little bit about your story and how you got to where you are today. And you've also a writer, producer, and now you just came out with a book. So would love to hear more about that.
Well, life is funny. Everybody's on a journey of some kind, and sometimes we think we know where the journey is taking us, and then oftentimes we find it we had no idea where the journey was taking us. And I certainly had no idea where my journey was taking me. I was born in Kansas City, Missouri, excuse me, and I moved to Los Angeles in the mid 80s, not to pursue anything in the entertainment business, but to continue to pursue what I had been doing back there, which was construction. And I became a contractor here in California, and I did that for a very long time and built a small company. I had about 35 employees at one point, and I got a phone call one day from a woman named Arlene, who later I realized was Joe Mantegna's wife, about some problem at their house. So I go to the house and I'm looking around, and as you can imagine, it's a big house. It's a nice house. Not anything like it's not a mansion, but it was like certainly somebody who lived there had means. And I started looking around and I'm like, this seems like a show business house. I'd been in a few before. I had done some work for Robert Stack, and I had done some work for Raquel Welch, and just different celebrities over my time. Which, if you work in Los Angeles, you're bound to do work for a celebrity at some point. So it wasn't a shock that I was in this guy's house. But what was a shock to me was I'm a huge fan of, and always have been, of the Rat Pack, Dean Martin, Frank Sinatra, Sammy Davis Jr., and that era of music probably is my favorite. I mean, I love the Beatles, I love the Stones, I love rap, I love it all, but that swinging music of the 60s and 50s is like that's my thing. Well, he had just finished a film called Rat Pack where he played Dean Martin. That's what got me excited. I was like, oh, it's that guy that played Dean Martin, and what a fantastic job he had done. And I had already been a fan of his from Searching for Bobby Fischer, was one of my favorites. He had done three Woody Allen films. I mean, he had done a lot of really great stuff, Godfather 3. So I was already a fan, but that one was like, that's the movie. So he wasn't home when I originally went there. I think he was on location working. I had to go back. When I went back, he was there. So I started right off with, yes, I can fix your problem, but let's talk about Dean Martin, you know? And I think that connected with him. I think because I was probably like in my mid 30s at the time. And I think he was surprised that somebody my age was so enthusiastic about that music and those guys.
Mm.
Little did he know that I had read a book on Sammy Davis Jr. few years before that. And I was so taken by this autobiography that I thought, I wonder if I could write a movie from this book.
Yeah.
I knew nothing about that. I had done a little bit of writing. I'd had a couple little things published in local newspapers, nothing to speak of. But I thought maybe I could do this, you know? And I think that's my first life lesson, important life lesson for me was we all have our comfort zone,
Yeah.
and we're afraid to step outside that comfort zone because we don't know what's going to happen. But that's the only way you know what you're capable of, is if you're willing to take that step, you know. And I'm not talking about beating your head against the wall. Like, if you know, I'm never going to be a concert pianist. I don't know how to play a piano, so that's a lofty goal that's never going to happen. But I knew I could tell a good story, and I knew this book was really good. So I bought some screenwriting software. I bought a book on screenwriting by a guy named Sid Fields, and I read the book and I just started writing. I just started reading a chapter and I'd write some stuff, and I'd read a chapter and I'd write some stuff. Well, once I got done, I had a few friends read it. Everybody seemed to really like it, but well, I was a contractor. What am I going to do with this thing, right? So in my mind, I had accomplished a goal. I did write it. It's not bad. It went into a drawer. Okay. So after I meet Joe, he and I start to become friends. He owned a few other properties, rental properties at the time, and so whenever he needed work on something, he called me. And and then our relationship sort of grew in common things, like we both played golf. So once in a while we played golf together. He was often in celebrity golf tournaments. So he'd call me and say, "Hey, do you want to just tag along, be my caddy for the day, whatever?" So that was our relationship. And at this point in my life, talking about comfort zones, I knew that I was not happy doing what I was doing. I
Mhm.
didn't have a plan B. I didn't go to college. I didn't know what I was going to do, but I knew I didn't want to do that. And it was a time in my life I felt like this is my chance to do something, whatever it is, different than what I've been doing most of my life. Because I think for the first part of your life, oftentimes you do what you have to do to pay the rent, to buy groceries, whatever. Um, and this was a moment in my life where I thought I can take a chance here, and I can sell my company, and I can just see what's out there for me. So that's what I did. And I part of my deal in selling my company was that I had to stay on for 1 year for the transition. Well, Joe knew all about this. We hadn't really talked in great detail, but he knew what I was doing just from casual conversation. So about a month before my contract was up, we were coming back from golf, and he said, "What are you going to do in a month when your contract is up?" And I said, "I don't know yet, but I'll figure it out. I mean, I feel like I might have been flying by the seat of my pants my whole life anyway. So what's the difference?" And he said, "Well, I just got a series from for CBS called First Monday. It was about the Supreme Court." And he said, "I'm going to start a production company. They're going to give me an office. Would you like to come work for me?" So after half a microsecond of thought, I said yes, because this was the opportunity that I didn't know was coming.
Mhm.
So I went to work for Joe. Now that was September 10th, 2001. The next day, September 11th, everything changed. And so we hadn't even gone into production on the show yet. There was like about a 2 week delay. So finally we go in. Now, my first day working for him, I almost quit. And the reason I almost quit is because I went to his trailer. I mean, again, I'm a kid from Missouri, and
Mhm.
now I'm on a studio lot. There's trailers, there's actors, there's people in costumes walking by. It's just like, it's surreal for me, you
Mhm.
know, certainly out of my comfort zone. So I find his trailer, I go in his trailer, and he said, "Oh, you're good, you're here." And I said, "Well, yeah." And I said, "What would you like me to do for you today?" And he said, "Well, I have a list of people here. I directed a film. I'm having a screening. I want to invite these people. I'd like for you to call them and invite them." I said, "Okay." Now I get the list. I look at the list, and it's every name you recognize: Andy Garcia, Billy Crystal, Sid Caesar. I'm just going, "Oh my God. I can't call." And now this is not their publicist or their managers or their. This is their personal home phone number, probably at the time,
Mm.
2001. I was so scared. Talk about out of your comfort zones. And I'm calling these people like, hello, is Mr. Crystal at home? I'm so scared and nervous because this is not me. So as I'm doing this, I'm thinking like, well, that's the end of my showbiz career. I can't do this. This isn't me. But by the end of the day, I thought to myself, this is outside my comfort zone for sure. But since I have nothing else to go to at the moment, let me give this a week, just 1 week, see how I feel at the end of the week. By the end of the week, that was it. I was hooked. I felt like I knew what I was doing. I felt like I was being helpful to him in a way that he needed, and that was it. And that's been almost 23 years ago at this point. Um, then our relationship transitioned a little bit about 2 years later. I got up the nerve to show him my Sammy Davis Jr. script.
Mm.
And I could see the look in his eye like, okay, so this guy was a contractor. All of a sudden he thinks he's a screenwriter. What am I going to do with this guy now?
Mhm.
But Joe is probably the kindest person I've ever known and was willing to take a little bit of his time and read what I wrote just to humor me, if nothing else. Well, a couple of weeks later, he comes back to me and he says, this is pretty good, this script. Is this something that you want to do? Writing, is that something you want to do? That was a big turning point in my life because no one had ever asked me that question before. I hadn't even asked myself that question before. So I had to think, like, is it? And I said, yeah, I think it is because I enjoyed doing it. It wasn't that hard for me. And he said, great, let me read it one more time. So he read it again. This time took a red pen and made all his notes and corrections and crossed things out. And you don't need this and do this in the third act instead of the second, and all those kind of encouraging notes that at first I was like, oh my God, this is like awful. He said, no, 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 it's good. You just haven't done this before. Take it from me. You're on the right track. That combined with um, reading scripts for him, like as you can imagine, a guy like Joe gets a lot of scripts in the mail, and at the time still does. And
Yeah.
he'd hand me 5 scripts and he'd say, read these, tell me if they're any good. What do I know? And he goes, well, you know what a good story is. If you feel like you've read a good story, let me know. And a lot of them weren't great, I gotta say. Some were really great, some were good. Um, One thing I noticed in all the ones that were bad, they always start out really great, like, wow, this is gonna be great. But then the end kind of falls apart. It's always the last act, the end of the story. So kind of right then I started to develop my own little writing philosophy is have the ending in mind before you start the beginning,
Yeah.
because the ending is almost more important than the beginning. Uh, and so then over the course of the next, 23 years now I mean, I've written lots of television shows. I've written for Criminal Minds. Joe and I produced some things, some Emmy award winning documentaries in the past. Like we've done a lot of really great work, and it's all been due to his encouragement of me and my path and my dream of wanting to be a writer. And then almost the same thing happened with the book when I had written them during the COVID and the writer strike. I had this idea that I had pitched to a network for a drama series that they didn't really get excited about it, but I was very excited about it and thought, I wonder if it could be a novel. Once again, I thought, I wonder if I can do it. Let me see if I can. And I finished the novel, and it was like history repeating itself because I went to his office. I'd mistakenly printed it on one side of paper only. So the thing was like, it looked like War and Peace. It was so thick because it was twice as thick as it had to be. And I was in his office and I said, hey, when you get a minute, would you read this? And he was like, oh my God, what is this? And I said, it's a novel. And I flipped the pages. I said, it's only one side page. That's why it looks big. And he said, when did you do this? And so I told him. Same kind of thing, like a couple of weeks, maybe a month later, he came back to me and he said, "This is a really good book and you got to publish it. And there's even not even a lot I would change. I think you just need to hire an editor to help you with your formatting and that kind of stuff because novels and screenplays are totally different animals. And I didn't know how to write a book. So I hired an editor and named Cara Highsmith, and she's been wonderful helping me guide me like this is the way it should be formatted and this is how you divide up the chapters and all that good stuff. And now it's out and it's selling really well and I'm getting all kinds of great reviews and I'm very excited about it. And once again, my buddy Joe has just been incredibly supportive the whole way and encouraging and tough at times when he needs to be. And but I guess my point on the whole thing is like you just never know what your journey is going to be, like had I not shown him that first screenplay, had I not shown him this manuscript, like I don't know how different it would have been. And both things certainly were out of my comfort zone. Even as a writer, even as a television writer with a lot of established credits, writing a novel is a very different thing. In fact, my editor, Cara, said to me after she read it, she said, I've worked on a lot of projects of screenwriters that try to transition into novelists, and it usually doesn't go very well because it's such a different medium. But she goes, you did it. You actually wrote a really good book. So I thought, wow, that makes me feel pretty good.
Yeah, a few things come to mind that I would love your thoughts on. Kind of
Sure.
what you've learned throughout your journey so far is, I think the first thing is, we all have that plan in life that we set, right? I'm sure you had that when you were in construction, right? You want to grow the
Yeah.
business, of course, and you think you're going to be doing this for, the rest of your life, but then things change. And it was never in our plan to it probably was never in your plan to go into being a producer or writer, author. It was never in your plan. And oftentimes when those opportunities come, there's a lot of fear to step into something new that we're uncomfortable in. How was that for you transitioning into something new? How did you deal with like the fears that you had, the uncertainties, the unknown? It was probably an industry that you didn't know much about either.
Yeah.
Um, you're kind of just said, let's give it a go. Like, how did you deal with that?
Well, I have a couple of answers. So let's go back to the first part of your question being, had I
Yeah.
ever imagined myself in that world? I guess I must have, right? Or I wouldn't be here. There must have been a point because I'm a firm believer in you put out into the universe what you want, and usually it comes back to you in some form. Now, I don't remember specifically saying I want to be a writer or a producer, but I do remember when I was a teenager having a conversation with somebody saying that I wanted to make money with what I had in my head, with my thoughts. I felt like I was a creative person as a young man, and I didn't know how to monetize that, but I knew that's what I wanted. I wanted to monetize what's in my head. Um, the second part of your question about the fear, well, I would say that, yeah, there's always fear and trepidation anytime you do something. I mean, I feel like even so, going back to when I was doing construction, even though I knew what to do and I had done it for a long time, every time I started a new job, especially a big job, there's always a little bit of like, "Gee, I hope everything goes well. You don't want anybody to get hurt. You don't want somebody to fall off a roof. You want your customer to be happy. You want everything to go off on time." There's always some sort of fear, I guess, going into anything. And this was no different. And I think the way that I have always dealt with that is by taking one thing at a time. Uh, rather than starting a book and worrying about the ending, not the story ending, but finishing it, I worried more about the next page I was going to write, the next chapter I was going to write. And the other thing that I'm a firm believer in is because I didn't tell anybody I was writing a book except my wife. She was the only person I told. Part of it was I didn't want to get halfway through and be like, okay, everybody, I'm not writing a novel. Okay.
Hmm.
Um, but the other part is that you have to be very careful who you share your hopes and dreams with, because not everybody's on your side,
True.
even though they appear to be, you know. And when it comes to anything creative, especially, it doesn't take a lot to shoot that down. Do you know? Like if you say to somebody like, I think I'm going to write a novel. Like, novel? What? You don't know anything about writing a novel. What are you doing? Oh, stick to screenplays. Do what you know. You know that those sort of comments have an impact. You know, but if you keep it to yourself, if you just work on your thing and do it and believe in yourself, you know, you'll accomplish more. I don't know if you'll accomplish everything you want, but you'll certainly accomplish more than if you brag to the world about what you're doing and then now you got to do it, you know. And I remember also early on Joe telling me when we're talking about writing, he said, you know, you really have to believe in yourself,
Mm.
because if you don't believe in yourself and what you're doing, how do you expect anyone else to believe in you? You know, in other words, if you go into, and I've been in many pitch meetings, if you're not excited and if you're not convinced that this is the best thing that this network has ever seen, then they're not either.
Yeah.
You know, they're gonna feel that energy from you. They're gonna say, well, thanks for coming in, we'll let you know, which means no.
Yeah.
You know, so I guess I just try to take a bite at my dad passed away a couple years ago. When I was a kid, he used to tell me, you know how you eat an elephant? One bite at a time.
Hmm.
One bite at a time. Just take a little bit, you know. And screenwriting and also in my book, I I tried really hard to never end a writing session without knowing what was going to happen next. Because I feel like as long as I know, like, okay, in the next chapter or in the next scene, I know what I want to do, then I'm eager to get back to it. I'm eager to sit down in front of the computer again and keep working. If I end off like where I just don't know what's going to happen next, I'm for me, I noticed and there's a longer gap between when I sit down again because I don't know what I'm writing next. So that's that's what I do.
Hmm. What advice would you have for those that, they have this plan, but they have those opportunities to step into something new? Um, what advice would you have for those that are kind of at that crossroad where they feel that tug to step into something new, but are really fearful with the uncertainties, or maybe it's a field that they necessarily don't know much about, but they know they'll probably enjoy or they want to try it out. What advice would you have for those that?
I mean, I think you have to try because if you
Mhm,
don't try, like, what is the worst that could happen? That you won't achieve it, you won't attain it. Well, you don't have it now.
mhm,
So why not try? There's no failure in it trying. There's only failure in not trying. You know, you're guaranteed to fail if you don't try.
yeah,
And I think that in life, it's all about our complacency and our comfort zones and all those kinds of things that we got to just be willing to step outside of it just a little bit. Traveling is like that. I mean, my wife and I have traveled fairly extensively. We've been to Europe and we've been to Mexico a few times. And anytime you travel outside the United States, and even within the US, but certainly outside the United States, whenever you go to a foreign country in a foreign place, there is a lot of uncertainty there. You've never been there
true.
before. Maybe you don't speak the language, you can't read the signs. But once you get there and you start looking around and you start meeting people and oh, that guy speaks English, it ends up being a fantastic time.
Yeah. Dan, you've achieved great success. You've received countless awards, like we're seeing behind for those that are watching. Um, but I wanted to start off I want to talk about the failures and successes and how you dealt with both.
Yeah.
like you mentioned, you have to give it a go, and if you fail, you know, um, you won't know how it was if you didn't try it out.
Yeah.
How do you, and I'm sure you face failure, countless failures. Like, how did you deal with that? Like, how did you deal with failure?
Failure is tough. I mean, there's no getting around that. When you fail at something, the first thing you do is, I mean, the first thing I think we all do naturally is blame ourselves. You screwed it up. Why didn't you do this? And why didn't you do that? But I think you have to take every failure as a learning opportunity, a way for you to examine what's happened, maybe not right away, while it's still very raw. It's my wife. She's um, not when it's very raw, but when it's, when you've been able to take a little moment to reflect, because this book is the result of a failure. This book is a result of an idea that I had pitched to a network. So there's a network that I done a bunch of shows for. I've written and created some shows for in the past, and they had asked me. They said, we want to get into, because all the stuff I had done with them before had been sort of documentary style or sort of quote unquote unscripted style. And then they approached me and they said, we'd like to get into the scripted drama world. And I had written for Criminal Minds and I'd sold a couple of other drama pilots. And they asked me to pitch some ideas. So actually, Joe and I to pitch them some ideas. So Joe and I came up with three ideas for between us, three ideas for a scripted drama. We pitched all three. Long Branch, they were like, oh, that's kind of interesting. Tell us more. So I wrote up a synopsis for them. They read the synopsis, asked a few questions, and then decided it wasn't for them. Okay. They ended up picking a different one, which we wrote the screenplay for, and that was almost 3 years ago. Nothing ever happened with it. So I'm glad they didn't pick Long Branch. But there was something about that story that I just I couldn't let it go in my mind, and I sort of feel like whenever I have a story idea that I find myself thinking about while I'm driving somewhere or I'm getting ready to go to sleep or whatever, like it just won't leave my consciousness, then I have to write it down. That's what it has to get out. So I started writing this thing as a book, and like I said, I didn't tell anybody because I thought I'm going to get to page 50 and be like, I don't know what happens next. I guess I'll save it for another time. That never really happened. It just kept coming out. I kept knowing what was going to happen next. And so that that little success is born from what I thought was a failure to begin
Hmm.
with. Because anytime you get rejected, especially in Hollywood is a I don't want to say it's cruel, although I have said that. It's a very calloused business. Do you know what I
Yeah.
mean? Like, you're too fat, you're too old, you're too young, you're too skinny, you're too whatever. Like it's very calloused. Okay. So you have to develop a thicker skin because almost every single time you get rejected, it's nothing personal generally. It's just that they're looking for something, you didn't show them what they were looking for, so they didn't buy it. That's all it really boils down to. I've been in many casting sessions for actors where I've seen the director who who's read the script obviously and has a particular person in mind for the spot for the show, and I've seen people come in, and then as soon as that person comes in, they know it before they even read the line. That's my guy. That's my girl. That's the person I've been looking for. And as long as they do a decent audition, they're going to get the job. Now, I've seen them cast people not even in the union. They don't care. They really don't care. Everybody puts a lot of importance on. Are you in SAG? Are you in this? Are you in that? It kind of doesn't matter when you're starting out. If you're right for the part, they'll get you in the union. Once you get a job, you get in the union. So I think that people have to just realize that failure and rejection is not necessarily a bad thing. It's a thing to learn from, and it's a thing to overcome.
Mm. And then how do you deal with success? Because I think, rarely people talk about their success is because, like, through my experience, Dan, like, once I got a taste of success, is that's what I went after, and I realized that was almost the wrong thing to go after.
Yeah,
But like, how did you deal with that? Because you received many accolades throughout your career so far.
yeah.
Like, how did you deal with having success and not allowing it to maybe get to you?
Well, I
Get
think it gets to everybody in the beginning. I mean, I think I'll tell you right off the bat, in the beginning for me, I was full of myself for a little while. I thought I was pretty darn cool, you know. But I think there comes a point where either someone takes you down a notch and you realize like I'm not that cool. I just saw an interview with Julia Louis-Dreyfus, who recently got a star on the Walk of Fame, and she said, she's standing there and they unveil the star and it's this wonderful moment. And she looks down and she said, they spelled my name wrong on the star. And she goes, just at the moment that you think, boy, have I really made it, the universe goes, no, not really, not quite, just relax. So something like that happens in your life. But I think that you hopefully you get past all of that and you find a love for the work. I created a series called Hollywood Weapons Factor Fiction a few years ago with a friend of mine, Tim Kremen, and we came up with this idea for a show that was kind of like Mythbusters in the sense that we would take a scene from a TV show or a movie where a weapon was used, right? So, for example, in the movie Jaws, when Roy Scheider shoots the scuba tank in the shark's mouth, it explodes and kills the shark. So you take a scene like that and then you test it in the real world with real weaponry to see would that really happen, right?
Mhm.
So we did 6 seasons of that show, and it was a blast, literally, to do that show. But when I think back about my most memorable or enjoyable moments,
Yeah.
it wasn't necessarily the work, it was the people that I was around. It was my friends, it was my producing partners and my camera people and my director and my first AD and makeup girl, all those people that we assembled for this show, that you spend so much time together, 10, 12 hours a day. And we're often on location. And then you wrap, you go back to your hotel room, you clean up, and then you all go out to dinner together and you hang out. Like that's what I remember most about that show. And I think that when you find the love of that, it really helps balance things out, like, yeah, it's a TV show. And, I go back and I visit my family and they tell us about this. And have you ever met so and so? And it's like, can't we just talk about barbecue and the Chiefs? Like, it's a job. It's like any other job. Yeah, maybe it's a little more high profile, but it's still a job. I still have rotten days. I still throw my hands up in the air, at least once a week. I mean, it's a job.
Yeah. Yeah, that's so true. Like, I work in private aviation, and people think, oh, it's so cool, but I'm like, yep, it's just a job though.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, there's obviously perks and things like that in any job, but
Yeah.
there's always downsides. No, there's no perfect job out there.
Yeah, for sure. Well, in our kind of our final moments together, Dan, tell us a little bit about your book, Long Branch.
Well, here it is, right here, Long Branch. You can get it on Amazon, Barnes and Noble. They have it in print and digital format. Um, so they say write what you know, right?
Yeah.
Well, in the last 23 years, I've met a lot of great actors, some very famous, some not so famous, some not famous at all, but wonderful people, very, very talented. Fame and talent have nothing to do with each other. Um, and what I've seen is many times are actors who have some success, but then for one reason or another, never are able to sort of parlay it past that point. Sometimes they get typecast. I mean, if you think back about, I don't know if you ever remember the show Gilligan's Island. The actor Bob Denver, who played Gilligan, I think he found it very difficult to do anything after that show because he was so identified with that character
Mm.
that it was hard for him to find work after that, I think. And that happens a lot in this business. So the story is basically about a guy named Mason Powell, who is one of those guys. He had a very successful television show for about 12 years. He was a sheriff in an Old West town in the show called Tin Star, was the name of the show. That show ends and he can't really get work. So he starts doing autograph shows, those sort of personal appearances, autograph shows, signings, which are very lucrative for people like that. But then COVID happens, so that gets shut down for 2 years. But then when it comes back, when COVID sort of subsides to the point where the shows can come back, and he starts to go out and do these autograph signings, he just doesn't have the same audience that he had before, because everybody sort of has changed the way they live their life over that 2 year period. So
Mhm.
these shows are just not as full. He's just not making the kind of money he used to make. And then he finds himself in some very dire financial trouble and devises a plan, devises a plan to go back to his hometown of Long Branch, Georgia. To He has a plan where he can make some money fairly quickly back there. And once he gets there, he starts to do that plan, but at the same time, sort of falls into a mystery that's 30 years old that he himself may have had a part in when it happened 30 years ago. So now he's very distracted by that and starts to try to figure out what really happened. Does he believe what everybody tells him, or is it something else? And during that time, a lot of things happen to him. I can't, it's hard for me to say much more than that, but it's a very good mystery novel. If you like mysteries, I could almost guarantee you will never figure out what's going on until it's revealed in the book. That's what everybody tells me. Everybody tells me you just never know what's happening, and it's an easy read. Those are the two things I keep getting from feedback.
Oh, cool. Well, for those listening, the link to get the book is in the podcast description on whichever platform. And if you're watching on YouTube, it's down below and you can order and get yourself a copy of the book. And also, if you want to find out more about Dan, links are there as well. Dan, how's the book been going for you since,
It's been selling well, yeah, very
yeah.
well.
Hmm.
And I mean, I've been doing obviously a lot of podcasts, and I'm going to probably do a signing event here pretty soon here in Los Angeles. And I would like to do one in my hometown of Kansas City, because I have a lot of family back there, so I'd love to go back and do one there.
Yeah.
And I don't know, I'm my in my dream, it's like somebody is going to read this and go, "This should be a TV show," and I'll just say like, "Really? I never would have thought of that. Great idea."
What are you up to today outside of the book?
Well, Criminal Minds is getting ready to start back on season 18
Okay.
next month. So I'll be somewhat involved in that. Um, we've got a show, there's another show called Gun Stories, which is a sort of a documentary style show about the history of firearms. And we've done 14 seasons of that already.
Wow.
That's on the Outdoor Channel, and we just wrapped that. That's in post right now, and then probably around November we'll start talking about next season's gun story episodes. And yeah, it's I'm very grateful. I'm very blessed. My wife and I, we just celebrated our 7th wedding anniversary a couple of weeks ago, and had a wonderful trip to Mexico. We visited some of her family and spent some time in Mexico City, and just had a blast. It was really wonderful.
Nice, nice. Well, cool. Well, Dan, thank you so much for sharing your story on the podcast and sharing your insights. Love this is such a unique story, and I really enjoyed like getting to know you and your journey and how how things have evolved for you to have and continue to have such a successful career in the industry.
Thank you, Cameron. I enjoyed being here with you.
Yeah, thank you. Well, thank you so much for tuning in to Navigation and Discovery with Cameron Singh. I really hope that you enjoyed this podcast interview with Dan, and definitely check out his book, Long Branch, Never Let the Truth Stand in the Way of a Good Story. And you can find out more details about Dan in the podcast description on whichever platform you're listening on. And if you want to go check me out, go find out more about things that I have to offer, my book, Navigation and Discovery. You can go find that out at CameronSingh.com. Thank you again for tuning in. Don't forget to like, share, subscribe, and we'll catch you for another brand new episode next week.